Hello my darling guys, gals, and non-binary pals, and welcome to my booktube channel. I'm Julia, and today I'm going to talk about some of my favorite queer underrated books. This video idea is taken from a video by Cece over at Problems of a Book Nerd, so I will link to her original video down below. The first book that I wanted to recommend is Exit West by MOHSIN. This is a sort of Middle Eastern sci-fi fantasy about an unspecified Middle Eastern country where doors start to open to other places around the world. Meanwhile, a new group has come into power that has upended everyone's lives, and this young couple decide to do as several others have done before them and escape through one of the doors to a location somewhere else in the world, reasoning that it's going to be safer than their home. The doors open up all over the world, which results in this new angle to the refugee crisis and immigration issues, where if there are no borders or airport checkpoints, people can go wherever they want, and the book explores what would happen with all of that while also following this couple. They consist of Nadia, a hijabi woman, and Saeed, who works as a he does marketing. So after they leave, they end up in Mykonos in Greece, and then in London, where them and many other immigrants like them are kind of, the section they're in is walled off because the government is xenophobic and terrified of them, basically. And then they find their way to California through another door, where they eventually grow apart in such a, you don't have to hear the word beautiful to describe a breakup, but the way that it's handled is just so wonderful. It's just very amicable, and you totally understand, they came together in this really difficult circumstance, and they went through this terrible thing together, and when they become more settled, they realize that they're just not the same people anymore, and they decide to break up. And Saeed gets a girlfriend who's a chef in California and moves in with her, so that's where the bi rep comes in. But I also recommend this book, not just for the bi rep, which kind of surprised me because I hadn't seen it talked about, but just the discussion of immigration and refugee issues, and also beautiful magical realism, and just a really well done couple, and I highly recommend Exit West. Next is the memoir We Have Always Been Here by Samra Habib. This is written by a Pakistani Canadian woman and chronicles her life as she realizes that she's queer. She puts that label on herself, so she's not necessarily bi or pan, she identifies as queer, and her husbands and other partners and her photography projects and her family. I was broken apart and lovingly stitched back together by this book. The identity of Samra is so similar to my own experiences, where you're not sure what label to put on yourself, you just know that you're queer. And she also talks about her religion as a Muslim and how she was able to come back to that religion in her adulthood through a group of fellow queer Muslims in Canada. And it was just altogether a really beautiful, thoughtful book, and is also about immigration and finding home in a new place while being queer and Muslim, and having to deal with your family and your family's expectations. It was one of my favorite books this year. The next two books are romance books, both by Alyssa Cole from her Reluctant Royals series. These books are very popular in Romancelandia, but BookTube doesn't talk about romance novels enough, so I'm here to fix that. The first novel by her that I want to recommend is actually a novella, and I've talked about it on here before. That's Once Ghosted, Twice Shy. It is a both first meetings and second chances novella. These two characters, one perspective is told in the past and one perspective is told in the present. So one of them is narrating the chapters where they first met. One of them is narrating the chapters after they had broken up and are now getting back together for one more whirlwind weekend in New York. I adore Alyssa Cole. She's my favorite romance author and one of my favorite authors, period. Her characters are so relatable and they talk in such a like hip modern voice. Their problems are so like of the moment. You really feel like they are someone that you could walk past on the street or someone that you could be friends with, and I just really love her voice. It's so fun and funny, and yet her characters are always really, really emotionally mature. Their problems never stem from this dumb lack of communication. All of the issues are resolved by people being emotionally mature, people acting like adults. Which segues into the next book that I want to recommend, A Prince on Paper, which is the third book in the Reluctant Royals series. This follows Nya and Johan, who both appeared in earlier books in the series, and oh my gosh, I talked about this as being one of my favorite books that I read last year, and it still holds up. I adore this book. The characters here are like the most emotionally mature characters in a romance novel. They're both so wonderful. Like, I think one of my favorite moments in the book is just when they're both sitting on their bed doing like their respective works. Like Johan is working on his charity work and Nya is working on something else, and one of them remarks on, I'm just like, yeah, this is nice. This is like a realistic romance, and they're so cute together. Nya is really inexperienced in the ways of love and physical attraction, and Johan is perfectly fine to take that slow. In terms of identities, Johan is bi, and then, this is a spoiler, but I hold with the idea that identities are not a spoiler. Johan's younger sibling, who is also the heir to their country, comes out as non-binary at the end of this book. You very rarely see non-binary characters in traditionally published romance. I know that they exist in self-published books, but this was just great to see. I was really, really pleasantly surprised by that, and they're just a kid, so they're not going to get their own romance, but I thought that was great, and Alyssa Cole is just killing it. She just came out with the first book in a new series, How to Catch a Queen, and then she has a full-length FF novel coming out next summer, which is a queer Anastasia retelling. We love to see it. The next underrated queer book that I want to talk about is A Memory Called Empire by Arcady Martine, which won the Hugo Award for 2020. This book is such an incredible masterclass in world building. There is this intergalactic empire that spans multiple worlds. A young woman from an independent station of the empire called Cell Station is coming to the empire as an ambassador for her people, and along the way gets caught up in this web of political intrigue, all stemming back to the fact that her people from LaSalle Station can store their memories in a microchip and then put it into their brains, so if they're doing a complicated job, they can have the memories of their predecessors in their heads. And Mahit, the ambassador, has the previous ambassador's memories in her head, and everything in the book comes to revolve around this chip. And also, Mahit falls in love with 3 Seagrass, who is sort of her liaison when she's in the Empire. And this was like so slow burn that like it was that beautiful like little nibbles of hints of romance that I personally love to see. I am a big fan of the slow burn where they like don't look at each other until page 100, and this was that, because it's like, is that something? Oh, I'm being teased. Oh no. Oh no. Oh, they're kissing now. Excellent. Incredible. Next book, The Riverbank by Kij Johnson. If you, like me, were a queer kid reading Redwall, being like, this is really straight, or you were, like me, a queer kid reading Wind in the Willows, you're like, this is really gay. Buddy, come here, close, come here. I've got a book for you. It's called The Riverbank by Kij Johnson. So my friend Kij, I actually emailed her once for a project in college, and she did confirm that these characters are queer, which was fantastic, so I'm here to bring you all the good word. The Riverbank is an officially licensed Wind in the Willows sequel with lesbians. Like, y'all, when I realized that these two ladies were a thing, and like when Kinch confirmed it, I like lost it. So there's a few different ways that Wind in the Willows sequels have introduced female characters, because there are none in the Wind in the Willows, which, I mean, I love, but like any classic, definitely has its flaws that I caution people in before they pick it up. But yeah, the Wind in the Willows has no female characters except for like a washerwoman. Anyway, so sometimes in other Wind in the Willows sequels that I've read, they'll add a female character as a romance for one of the male characters, which is especially egregious when it's for like the rat, for example, who is obviously in a relationship with Mole. I sound unhinged. Okay, so Kij Johnson kicked it up a level. She's like, what if I introduce 2 new female characters, both amazing in their own way, and they're lesbians, Harold. This book is like a ray of sunshine on a cloudy day. It is pure delight. There's like almost zero conflict. There's just like nice descriptions of food, and there's a mole and a rabbit that are in love. And like, if you're not interested by now, what are you doing with your life? The next book that I want to recommend is an MOHSIN gay book, Darius the Great is Not Okay by Adib Khorram. Now, Darius does not come out in this book, but he comes out in the sequel, Darius the Great Deserves Better, so I'm gonna count it. In Darius the Great is Not Okay, Darius is a half-Iranian boy who has not met his maternal grandparents because they live in Iran, but his grandfather has a brain tumor, and it's basically his and his family's last chance to see him. They all fly to Iran for Nowruz, the Persian New Year. This, like, I cried reading this book just from like the familial love of it all. Darius connects with his Iranian heritage. He connects with his dad, who's white. They both have depression and discuss all of that in detail. Darius makes a new friend, Sarab, who is Baha'i. They are a religious minority within Iran. But mostly it's just about Darius like connecting with his heritage, connecting with his grandparents, and just loving his family and being loved by his family. And I adored it. It was another one of my favorite books this year. And the part that made me cry is, so earlier this year, around the time that I was reading this book, my dad was sick. He's fine now, but it was the time of, you know, when COVID was just starting, and it was just like a really scary time. And so Darius's mom, whose father has a brain tumor, is kind of like looking back on when her dad was better, and like she hasn't, you know, been back to see him since her kids were born, basically. And it just like really touched me in such a profound way. And yeah, I just thought it was really good. Oh man, I always like unexpectedly cry on camera. It just kind of comes out of nowhere. And the next book to recommend, because I can't go more than 2 videos without talking about it, is An Unkindness of Ghosts by Rivers Solomon. And the identities here are non-binary / genderqueer. I'm gonna cry again just talking about this. So this takes place on a generational ship set up like the apartheid slaveholding South pre-Civil War. Apartheid? Shoot. Antebellum. Oh my gosh. Aster, who is a... Every time I talk about this book, I just lose it. Okay, so Aster is a scientist, and she's trying to... Her mom died right after she was born, and she's trying to decipher her notes and figure out the secrets of the ship they're on that her mom figured out. But meanwhile, the ship's doctor, Theo, who she works for, is they're in love, and it's really good. It's so powerful, and it's another slow burn where like their romance creeps up on you, and then by the end of it you're like, I've never shipped anything harder in my entire life. Okay, so their relationship is not like the most important thing going on in this book, and I don't want to harp on about their relationship too much. There's also an incredible experience of genderqueerness from both of the characters, also fantastic world building of the culture of the ship, searing commentary on structural, institutional racism, and fantastic sci-fi. You should definitely read it. Next is a book that I can confidently say is underrated because it has an astonishingly low rating on Goodreads, and I can't figure out why. The Sunlight Pilgrims by Jenny Fagan. This is a climate change near future novel, and it follows Dylan, who is, I'm gonna count him as bi because he says that he's bi-curious at one point in this book. Estella, a trans girl who lives in Scotland with her mom, and Dylan moves up to their town after two of his family members in London pass away, so he decides to move up north to Scotland even though it's like routinely negative 40 degrees outside. And Dylan starts to fall in love with Estella's mother, and all the while it's like the most beautiful novel about the end of the world. It's like always cold and snowy, and there are all these issues with, you know, the world is ending and all of that, but it's such an intimate portrait of the end of the world through these two characters' eyes, and is mostly focused on like the beauty of their surroundings and the love that they have for each other. And I really don't know why it's so low rated, possibly because, no spoilers, the ending is ambiguous. I can say that with confidence, which I usually don't like, but for some reason it really works for me for this novel. So if you want like a cli-fi book that kind of reminds you of The Left Hand of Darkness with a trans girl, check out The Sunlight Pilgrims. Next, this is another one that I had to talk about, even though I've talked about it like multiple times, I think, on this channel. The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. I'm gonna cry again, but this time like about friendship. Okay, so in The Vanished Birds, it is a very Le Guin-style novel which stitches together several different chapters and characters of this far future world where humanity has colonized different planets. Parts of the human race live on these enormous space stations that were designed by this Japanese lesbian woman named Fumiko, and the story is also following a woman named Nia Imani who finds a mysterious young boy seemingly without a past and is tasked with raising him alongside a crew of hand-picked people who eventually they all start to raise this child together and become each other's family. So the identities here are the boy who grows up and is gay, Fumiko, an extremely complicated and nuanced character who is a lesbian, and then one of my favorite characters of the year, Sartoris, the asexual party planner who is on Nia's crew. And I gotta tell you, like, the friendship between Nia and Sartoris just, y'all, it just makes me weep. Like, they just care about each other so much. Like, this book is really something special. Like, in all seriousness, it's a fantastic debut, a fantastic new voice. You are introduced to these characters and fall in love with them in such a short amount of time, and situations and places and people are described so quickly and so perfectly in just a few sentences, and I am so excited to see what Jimenez does next. Next is the novella, I'm gonna cry again. I did not plan for this. I did not plan to cry all throughout the latter half of this video, but the next book is To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. Okay, so I kind of this is underrated because while Becky Chambers and her Wayfarers series isn't underrated, this novella is. It was nominated for a Hugo. It lost to This Is How You Lose the Time War, which, like, I could have predicted, but I wanted it to win because it's my favorite novella of all time. It is about 4 astronauts who were chosen to go on the first mission outside of our solar system, and their extremely long mission is to investigate these 4 habitable exoplanets. Because they're together for basically their entire lives, because they age while they're in cryostasis and they're traveling between the planets, they are, like, literally each other's family. The main character, Ariadne, is Pan and Polly, and her partners are Jack, who's a trans man, the captain Elena, who's lesbian, and then her best friend is Chikondi, who is asexual. And also, if you read, like, literature on astronauts, you'll know that, like, if we do send people to space for a really long time, they basically have to be poly or ace. So, like, that's, like, the perfect combination of astronauts right there, but I digress. This is like, hey, what if Interstellar but gay? The characters, while their bodies literally change to suit each planet, cling to their humanity in such a profound way. I really recommend her Wayfarers series, but I did want to spotlight this novella because it's so underrated and yet just so incredible. Next is the Elemental Logic series by Laurie J. Marks. This is the best fantasy series that no one's ever heard of. Honestly, it consists of 4 novels. The 4th one just came out, like, last year, so now you have no excuse not to read this whole series. But it follows the saga of Shaftal, a country that has been colonized by the invading Sainite army, and details Zanjana Tarwin, our main character, and her family as they not only fight back the colonizers, but take back their country and learn to live together in such, like, a well-done way. I've talked about the first 3 books at length in my previous videos, so I don't want to inundate you too much, but I think that everyone who is asking for a well-written queer fantasy should read this series. It's like the type of language that you find in Lord of the Rings, so like a beautiful, ponderous, well-described style with gay and lesbian characters that build incredible found families. That's literally how families work in Shaftal, is multiple couples raising children together. And I have not finished the series yet. I'm kind of holding off on finishing it because I don't want it to end, but it's definitely one of my favorite series that I read this year. If you are a fantasy fan and you've been looking for this series, like, I have a feeling that the more people know about this, the more they're going to love it. Almost done. The penultimate book that I want to talk about is The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. So this book is set in Le Guin's Ecumen series, where it's this, like, loosely connected group of sci-fi stories that all take place in the same universe over, like, vastly different time periods. This one is about an ambassador from the Ecumen, a black man named Genli I, who is tasked with trying to bring the planet of Winter into the Confederation of Planets. On the planet Winter, Gethenians change their gender based on kind of who they're with, or arbitrarily, but once a month when they go into Kemer, or heat basically, they become male or female, and the rest of the month they are agender. They go by he pronoun, and Ursula Le Guin, like, years after she wrote this book, was like, you know, he was a gender-neutral pronoun when I was writing it in 1969, but I messed up. This book isn't perfect, but, like, it also is, in a way. I, like, love this book with every fiber of my being. It is so, so special to me, despite the fact that I only read it a few years ago, it is definitely one of my favorites. A politician that Genli meets on Winter is named Estravin, who, against the judgment of his king, wants to bring Winter into the group of planets, and so helps Genli. And after Genli gets put in jail, they go on this months-long trek across the ice, because Le Guin loved her polar exploration, but the two of them, in this trek across the ice, fall in love. And like, this is one of those books where like, you have to like high school English class like read between the lines, but it's so rewarding if you do that, because yeah, look, I am telling you to read this book and like hunt for the gay, and I'm sorry, but like, it is so worth your time. It's a classic, and while it could definitely do better in terms of explicit agender queer representation, I still love it, and it has a special place in my heart. And the last underrated queer book I want to recommend is The House of Impossible Beauties by Joseph Cassara. This is a sort of fictionalized account of the people featured in the documentary Paris is Burning, which is about the New York drag ball scene in the 1980s. So the book follows fictionalized versions of the people in that documentary. It's sort of an ensemble cast with gay and trans characters. They're all Latinx and Black. It doesn't end happily. There's the AIDS crisis going on. All these people are poor and they're all just trying to get by. But as the title suggests, there is impossible beauty in this book, and like, as someone who loves to study queer history and who watched Paris is Burning in my queer theory class, I got a lot out of this book. If you like queer history, it's a perfect companion novel to Pose, because Pose is also engaging with the same ball scene that Paris is Burning covers, with some of the same like character archetypes, basically the same characters. So if you like Pose, House of Impossible Beauties is perfect. So that is it. Thank you all so much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and happy holidays to those of you celebrating.